What if the trail markers weren't for you? What if the silence of the forest was listening? What if you found something that was meant to stay buried? And what if you met someone who wasn't walking in the same direction as reality? These 4 true stories will make you think twice before ever stepping off the path. My girlfriend Maya and I are what you'd call weekend warriors. We both have demanding jobs in the city, the kind that drain you mentally, so every other weekend we'd pack up the car and drive out to one of the national forests a few hours away. It was our reset button, our church. We weren't extreme hikers, not the type to scale mountains or anything, but we loved a challenging 8 to 10 mile loop, the kind that makes your legs burn but rewards you with a view that makes you forget all about spreadsheets and deadlines. This particular trip was to the Cougar Creek Wilderness area, a place we'd never been before. The name alone sounded rugged and exciting. We found a trail online called the Hemlock Rim Loop. It was rated as moderate and promised old-growth forest and a beautiful overlook of the valley. Perfect. We set out on a Saturday morning in late fall. The air was crisp and the ground was a thick carpet of orange and red leaves. It was that perfect hiking weather where you're a little cold when you start, but you know you'll be warm once your heart gets pumping. The first few miles were exactly as advertised. The trail was well marked with blue plastic diamonds nailed to the trees every 100 feet or so. The forest was beautiful, almost unnaturally quiet. You know how usually you hear birds, squirrels, the rustle of something in the underbrush? There was none of that. It was just dead silent except for our own footsteps and breathing. I remember mentioning it to Maya and she just shrugged and said, "Maybe the animals are sleeping in." It was a joke, but the silence still felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. About 4 miles in, we reached a fork in the trail. According to the map on my phone, which thankfully still had a sliver of service, we were supposed to bear right. The signpost at the fork confirmed it. One arrow pointed right with Hemlock Rim carved into it. The other arrow pointed left, but the words on it were so weathered and worn, you couldn't make them out. The left path looked less traveled, more overgrown. Naturally, we went right. This is where things started to get strange. The blue trail markers, which had been so consistent, suddenly changed. Instead of the plastic diamonds, we started seeing small, brightly colored ribbons tied to tree branches. Red, yellow, blue, green. There was no pattern to it. At first, I thought maybe a different hiking club helped maintain this section of the trail. It was a little odd, but not alarming. We kept following them. But the ribbons started appearing more and more frequently. First, it was every 50 feet. Then every 20. Then it felt like every other tree had a colorful little ribbon tied to it. It went from being a trail marker to feeling like decorations. Like someone was preparing for a birthday party in the middle of the woods. I pulled out my phone again. The GPS dot showed we were still on the official trail, but it just felt wrong. The sheer number of ribbons was unsettling. Who would take the time to do this and why? Maya was getting quiet. She's usually the chatty one, pointing out cool-looking mushrooms or weirdly shaped trees. Now she was just walking with her head down, her eyes scanning the forest floor. "Do you feel that?" she asked suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Feel what?" I asked, looking around. The woods were still completely silent. "Like we're being watched," she whispered. I'd be lying if I said the thought hadn't crossed my own mind. I tried to laugh it off. "It's just the woods playing tricks on us," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The dense canopy of trees did create a sense of claustrophobia, and the thousands of ribbons now felt like 1,000 little eyes, all staring at us. We decided to pick up the pace to just get to the overlook and then head back. The sooner we were done with this section, the better. That's when we saw the first one. Hanging from a low-hanging branch, right at eye level, was a single pristine white sneaker. A kid's sneaker, maybe for a toddler. It was tied to the branch by its own laces, swaying gently in a breeze we couldn't feel. It was so out of place, so bizarre, that we both just stood there staring at it for a full minute. It wasn't old or dirty. It looked like it had been taken out of a shoebox that morning. There were no other signs of anyone, no footprints, no trash, nothing. Just a perfect, clean white sneaker hanging in the middle of nowhere. A cold dread started to seep into my bones. This wasn't a trail marker. This was something else. "Okay, this is weird," I said, stating the obvious. "Let's just keep moving." Maya nodded, not taking her eyes off the shoe. We walked past it, giving it a wide berth as if it were radioactive. Not 50 feet later, we saw another one. A small blue toy car, the kind you get from a vending machine, placed perfectly on a moss-covered rock right beside the trail. Then, 100 feet after that, a pair of children's sunglasses, one lens cracked, hanging on a twig. It was a breadcrumb trail of lost things, a child's things. The cheerful colors of the ribbons now seemed menacing, mocking. Every item we found was placed deliberately, carefully where we couldn't possibly miss it. A pink barrette, a single crayon, a half-eaten lollipop, still sticky with leaves and dirt stuck to it. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back. This wasn't right. We weren't just on a trail anymore. We were following a story, and I was terrified of where it was leading. I looked at Maya, and her face was pale. "I want to go back," she said, her voice trembling. "Now." I agreed instantly. We turned around, ready to retrace our steps, but when we looked back the way we came, the trail was gone. I don't mean it was overgrown or hard to see. I mean the path, the ribbons, the distinct corridor through the trees we had just walked down had vanished. It was just a wall of dense, impenetrable forest. We looked for our footprints in the leaves, but there was nothing. It was as if the woods had swallowed the path behind us the moment we turned our backs. Panic set in, pure, unadulterated panic. We were lost. My phone, of course, now had no service. The GPS showed our location as a blue dot floating in a sea of green, with the trail line we were supposed to be on sitting a half-mile to the east. We had been led astray. The ribbons, the toys. It was a lure. We stood there, paralyzed by indecision. We couldn't go back. The only way was forward. We had to hope that this thing, this trail, would eventually lead us somewhere. Anywhere. We started walking again, faster now, our eyes darting into the shadows between the trees. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It felt like a physical pressure on my skin. The trail of objects continued, but it started to change. The items became more personal. We found a laminated school photo of a little girl with a gap-toothed smile. A crumpled-up drawing of a house with a sun in the corner. Then we found a backpack. A small purple Dora the Explorer backpack sitting at the base of a huge ancient oak tree. It was half unzipped. Against my better judgment, I knelt down and looked inside. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pull the zipper. Inside, there was a juice box, a half-eaten bag of goldfish crackers, and a small leather-bound journal. I opened the journal. The first few pages were filled with childish handwriting and crayon drawings. But then the entries changed. The writing became frantic, messy. The last entry was just a few words, scrawled so hard it had torn through the page. It said, "He doesn't like it when you look at his face." A snap of a twig to our left made both of us jump out of our skins. We whipped our heads around but saw nothing. Just the endless trees and the suffocating silence. That was it. I dropped the journal, grabbed Maya's hand, and we ran. We didn't follow the trail anymore. We just ran. We crashed through bushes, stumbled over roots, our lungs burning, branches whipping at our faces. We didn't know where we were going, we just knew we had to get away from that place, away from that tree. We ran for what felt like an eternity. I have no idea how long it was, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had ceased to have any meaning. Then all at once we burst out of the trees and stumbled onto a path. A real path, with blue plastic diamonds nailed to the trees. We had found the hemlock rim loop. Or rather, it had found us. We didn't stop running. We followed the blue markers, sobbing and gasping for air until we finally saw the sign for the parking lot. We practically fell into our car, locked the doors, and just sat there, shaking, for what felt like an hour before I could even think about putting the key in the ignition. We called the park rangers from the road as soon as we got service. We told them everything. The ribbons, the trail of toys, the backpack. They took our information, but their tone was dismissive. They said it was probably just a geocaching trail or kids playing a prank. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I knew they wouldn't. Or if they did, I knew they wouldn't find anything. The woods wouldn't let them. We never went hiking in Cougar Creek again. In fact, we haven't been hiking much at all since then. That feeling of peace we used to get from the wilderness is gone. Now, when I look into a dense forest, I don't see beauty or solitude. I see a place that can watch you, a place that can lead you where it wants you to go. And I think about that little white sneaker, swaying in the silent woods, and I wonder how many others have followed the trail markers that weren't meant for them. I've always been a solo hiker. There's a meditative quality to being alone in nature that I just can't achieve with other people around. I like setting my own pace, stopping when I want, and getting lost in my own thoughts. For the past few years, my big project has been section hiking the Appalachian Trail. I take a week or two off work every summer and knock out another 100 miles. This story takes place on a stretch of the trail in rural Virginia, a section known for being particularly remote and rugged. I was on day 4 of a 6-day trek. The weather had been perfect and I was making great time. I was in that hiker's groove, where your body is on autopilot and your mind is just free to wander. The trail in this area follows a long, high ridge for several miles. To your right, the mountain drops off sharply into a deep, thickly wooded valley. To your left is more mountain, rising up. It's a beautiful but unforgiving landscape. There are very few access points, and you can go a whole day without seeing another soul. It was late afternoon, and I was starting to think about finding a place to set up my tent for the night. The sun was getting low, casting long, distorted shadows across the trail. That's when I first heard it. It was a sound that was so out of place it took my brain a few seconds to even process it. It was a rhythmic, metallic clanging, like someone hitting a pipe with a hammer. Clang, clang, clang. It was faint, but it was unmistakable, and it was coming from down in the valley, somewhere deep in the woods below the ridge. My first thought was that it was a bear warning. Some hikers hang their food bags from a rope and bang pots and pans together to scare off bears. But this didn't sound like a pot. It was a deeper, more resonant sound, and it was too consistent, too steady. It had a purpose to it. Curiosity got the better of me. I dropped my pack on the side of the trail and crept to the edge of the ridge, trying to get a look down into the valley. The foliage was incredibly thick, a dense canopy of green and brown that the sunlight couldn't penetrate. I couldn't see a thing. But the sound was clearer from the edge. Clang, clang, clang. It would go on for about a minute, then stop. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise itself. I'd stand there, straining my ears, my heart thumping, and then, just when I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it, it would start again. Clang, clang, clang. I should have just picked up my pack and kept walking. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to do just that. It's the #1 rule of the wilderness. If you encounter something you can't explain, you don't investigate. You leave. But I was arrogant. I was an experienced hiker. I told myself it was probably just a park ranger doing some kind of maintenance, or maybe a homesteader who lived off-grid. I convinced myself there was a logical explanation. The sound stopped again. This time the silence stretched on for longer. 5 minutes. 10. I was about to give up and move on when a new sound drifted up from the valley. It was a voice, a man's voice, singing. It wasn't a song I recognized. It was a low, mournful tune, almost like a sea shanty, but the words were indistinct. The melody was deeply unsettling. It rose and fell in a strange non-Western scale, and there was a raw, guttural quality to his voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Now I was truly spooked. A man, alone in the bottom of this inaccessible valley, first banging on metal and now singing this haunting, lonely song. This was not normal. I backed away from the edge of the ridge, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my pack, threw it on, and started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full run. My goal was to put as much distance as possible between me and that valley before nightfall. I hiked for another hour, my adrenaline pumping. The sun dipped below the horizon and the forest was plunged into a deep twilight. The clanging and the singing had stopped, and I was starting to feel a little bit of relief. I told myself I was far enough away. I found a small, relatively flat clearing about 20 feet off the trail and decided to make camp. I was exhausted, and I needed to rest. I set up my small one-person tent, cooked a quick meal on my camp stove, and crawled into my sleeping bag as soon as it was fully dark. The woods at night have their own symphony of sounds: the chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the leaf litter. I usually find these sounds comforting, but that night, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I lay there, wide awake, my ears straining to hear past the normal sounds of the forest. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up with a start. Something had woken me. The forest was completely silent. Not the peaceful quiet from earlier in the day, but a dead, unnatural silence. All the crickets, all the animal noises, they had stopped. It was the kind of silence that means a predator is near. And then I heard it. Clang. It wasn't faint and far away anymore. It was close. So close it sounded like it was right outside my tent. My blood ran cold. I lay there, frozen in my sleeping bag, not even daring to breathe. Clang. It was closer this time, maybe 20 feet away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. How had he found me? How had he gotten up from the valley and onto the ridge so quickly and so silently? Then I heard the singing. It was the same mournful, alien melody, but now I could hear the words. They weren't in English. It was some other language, harsh and guttural. And it was the voice of a man in deep, profound agony. He was circling my tent. I could hear his footsteps in the leaves, slow and deliberate, crunching a wide circle around my campsite. With every step he would sing a line of his terrible song, and then he would stop and hit whatever metal object he was carrying. Crunch, sing, clang, crunch, sing, clang. I have never felt terror like that in my entire life. I was trapped. I was in a flimsy nylon tent miles from another human being stalked by something that should not exist. I fumbled in the dark for my headlamp and my hiking knife, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what I was going to do. Fight? There was no way I could fight this. The sheer wrongness of the situation was paralyzing. He circled the tent for what felt like hours. The song, the footsteps, the clanging. It was a form of psychological torture. He never tried to touch the tent. He never spoke to me. He just kept up his horrifying ritual. I huddled in the back of my tent, clutching my knife, tears streaming down my face. I was convinced I was going to die there. At some point, I started to notice that the clanging was getting fainter. The circle he was walking was getting wider. His voice was becoming more distant. He was leaving. Slowly, agonizingly. The sounds receded back into the woods, heading back down towards the valley. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, listening, until the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees. I didn't even bother making coffee. I packed up my camp in record time, my eyes scanning the woods around me, expecting to see him standing there, watching me. But there was nothing. Just the trees and the morning light. I got back on the trail and I didn't just walk. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, then I walked until I could run again. I didn't stop until I reached the next trail crossing, 2 days worth of hiking in a single day. I hitched a ride into the nearest town and ended my trip right there. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say it was a bear, or I was dehydrated, or I just imagined it. But I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone on that ridge. Sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I can still hear it in my head, that mournful song and the steady, rhythmic clanging, and I wonder what he's building down there in the dark, silent valley below the ridge. My friends and I have a tradition. Every year for my birthday in October, the 4 of us pick a mountain we've never climbed, and we do a day hike to the summit. It's our way of celebrating, of pushing ourselves. This year, it was my turn to pick, and I chose Sentinel Peak. It's a fairly popular hike known for its 360-degree views from the top. The trail is well maintained, and on a clear autumn day, you can see for 100 miles. It was supposed to be a straightforward, fun day out. The group was me, Liam, Chloe, and Ben. We're all experienced hikers, we know what we're doing. We had the right gear, plenty of water, and we started early to give ourselves plenty of daylight. The hike up was great. The fall colors were at their peak, and we spent most of the time joking around and catching up. The trail was moderately busy. We probably passed a dozen other groups heading up or down. Everything was completely normal. The summit of Sentinel Peak is a large, rocky, bald cap. There's a geological survey marker set in a concrete pillar, and all around it are dozens of small rock piles. They're called cairns. Hikers build them. It's a tradition. You get to the top, you find a flat rock, and you add it to a little tower. It's a way of saying, I was here. Some of them are small, just 3 or 4 rocks high. Others are intricate, waist-high sculptures. We reached the summit around noon. The view was incredible, just as promised. We found a spot to sit, ate our sandwiches, and took the obligatory group photo with the survey marker. After we ate, we all kind of wandered off in different directions to explore the summit and take in the view. I decided I wanted to build my own cairn. I walked over to the far side of the summit, an area that was a bit more secluded and had a good supply of loose, flat rocks. That's where I saw it. Tucked away behind a large boulder, away from all the other cairns, was one that was different. While all the other cairns were made of the gray, lichen-covered granite that made up the mountaintop, this one was built entirely from smooth, white quartz stones. Quartz isn't native to that mountain. Someone would have had to haul all of those stones up to the summit, which would have been a tremendous amount of effort. But that wasn't the strangest part. The cairn itself was meticulously built, a perfect, symmetrical cone about 4 feet high, and embedded in the very top stone was an object. From a distance, I thought it was a piece of glass, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old silver locket, the kind that can hold a photograph. It was tarnished with age, but still glinted in the sunlight. I was fascinated. This wasn't just a pile of rocks. This was a memorial, a shrine. I felt a sense of reverence, like I was intruding on something deeply personal. I leaned in closer to look at the locket. It was heart-shaped, with intricate floral engravings on the front. I had this sudden, overwhelming urge to open it. I knew I shouldn't. It felt like a violation, but my curiosity was a physical force pulling my hand forward. My fingers trembled as I touched the cold metal. I pressed the tiny clasp, and the locket sprung open. There were no pictures inside. Instead, on one side, there was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. On the other side was a single, perfect, impossibly black feather. It wasn't the feather of any bird I'd ever seen. It was velvety, and it seemed to absorb the light around it. I carefully unfolded the tiny piece of paper. On it, written in elegant, old-fashioned cursive, were 3 words: "Don't break the seal." A chill, completely unrelated to the autumn wind, washed over me. I felt like I had just failed a critical test. I had broken the seal. I quickly snapped the locket shut, my heart pounding. I looked around, suddenly feeling like I was being watched. The other hikers on the summit were far away, dots of color against the gray rock. My friends were on the other side of the peak, out of sight. I was alone with this strange monument. That's when I noticed the smell. A faint, cloying scent, like rotting flowers and damp earth. It was coming from the cairn. I took an involuntary step back. As I did, I brushed against the rock pile, and one of the small quartz stones near the base was dislodged. It rolled a few inches and then stopped. Where the stone had been, there was now a small, dark opening. The smell was stronger now, billowing out of the hole. It was a smell of decay, of something ancient and long dead. I felt a wave of nausea, but underneath the revulsion there was that same morbid curiosity. I knelt down, telling myself I was being an idiot, and peered into the darkness. I couldn't see anything at first. It was just a black void inside the carefully constructed pile of rocks. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining the beam into the hole. And I saw them. Bones. Not animal bones. They were small, delicate and unmistakably human. The bones of a child. It was a jumbled, broken pile of them, crammed into the hollow space inside the cairn. And nestled among them were hundreds, maybe thousands of those same impossible, light-devouring black feathers. I scrambled backwards, dropping my phone, a scream catching in my throat. I had gone from discovering a curious monument to desecrating a hidden tomb in the span of 2 minutes. My mind was reeling. Who would do this? Why? Was this a memorial? Or was it something else? Was it meant to honor the dead, or to contain them? Don't break the seal. The words echoed in my head. What had I just done? I grabbed my phone and sprinted back towards my friends, my mind a blur of horror and panic. "We have to go," I gasped, stumbling into our lunch spot. "We have to leave. Now." They could see the terror on my face. They didn't even ask questions. They just started packing up their things. As we scrambled to get our gear together, I risked one last glance back at the white cairn. And I swear on my life, I saw something. A flicker of movement from the dark hole at the base of the cairn. It wasn't an animal. It was a wisp of something. Dark. Like black smoke or a piece of fluttering cloth. It seeped out of the hole and then dissipated in the wind. We practically ran down the mountain. We didn't talk. The joyful atmosphere of the morning was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. I didn't tell them what I saw until we were safely in the car, speeding away from Sentinel Peak. They didn't know what to say. Ben thought we should call the police. Chloe thought it was too crazy, that no one would believe us. In the end, we did nothing. What would we say? That I found a hidden grave on a mountaintop and then maybe, possibly saw a ghost? They'd think we were crazy. I've thought about it every day since. I've researched missing persons cases in that area, but found nothing that matched. I've tried to identify that black feather, with no luck. The only thing I know for sure is that we're not the only ones who leave a piece of ourselves on the mountain. Some things are sealed away for a reason, and I live with the constant gnawing fear of what I might have let out. I broke the seal, and I have no idea what the consequences will be. Of all the places I've hiked, the desert landscapes of the Southwest have always been my favorite. There's a stark, brutal beauty to them that speaks to me. The silence is different from the silence of a forest. It's a vast, empty silence that makes you feel both infinitesimally small and profoundly present. I was on a multi-day solo trip through a canyon system in Utah, a place known for its slot canyons and ancient petroglyphs. It's not a designated park, just Bureau of Land Management territory, which means you're truly on your own out there. The plan was to follow a dry riverbed, awash for about 20 miles, camping for 2 nights along the way. It was a journey I had prepared for meticulously. I had my route plotted on a topographical map, a GPS unit with extra batteries, and more than enough water to last me the entire trip. For the first day and a half, it was perfect. The sun was hot, the sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and the canyon walls were a stunning canvas of red and orange rock. I felt like the only person left on Earth. It was around noon on the second day that I saw the footprints. I almost missed them. They were in a patch of fine reddish sand in the middle of the wash. What caught my eye was that they were from shoes. Not hiking boots like I was wearing, but flat-soled shoes like sneakers or loafers. An odd choice for this terrain, but not impossible. The truly bizarre thing, the thing that made me stop and stare, was that the footprints were pointed the wrong way. They were heading up the canyon, in the direction I had just come from. But the tracks themselves were reversed. The heel was where the toe should be, and the toe was where the heel should be. It was as if someone was walking backwards. I stood there for a long time trying to puzzle it out. Maybe someone was playing a joke, or maybe they had some kind of special shoes. Nothing made sense. The stride was long and even, the impressions deep and confident. This person wasn't stumbling. They were moving with purpose. Backwards. I checked my own tracks. My heavy boot prints were clear in the sand. These other tracks were laid perfectly on top of them, but in reverse. This meant that whoever made them had passed this exact spot after me. But I hadn't seen or heard anyone. The canyon was narrow, with nowhere to hide, I would have noticed another person. A shiver of unease went down my spine. This remote corner of the desert was not a place for jokes. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it. Maybe I had gotten turned around. Maybe my perception was off. I took out my compass and my map. No, I was heading in the right direction. There was no explanation. I decided to press on, telling myself it was just a weird desert anomaly. But I couldn't shake the image of those footprints from my mind. For the next few hours, I kept seeing them. Every time the wash passed through a sandy patch, there they were. Perfect, reversed footprints, always heading in the opposite direction, always appearing as if the person was just ahead of me, just out of sight. The feeling of being alone, which had been so comforting, was now terrifying. I felt like I was being followed or perhaps preceded by something I couldn't comprehend. I started calling out every now and then. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice echoed off the canyon walls and was swallowed by the immense silence. There was never a reply. The sun began to set, painting the canyon in fiery colors. I knew I needed to find a place to make camp for my second night. I found a small alcove in the canyon wall, a natural rock shelter that would offer some protection from the wind. As I was clearing a spot for my sleeping bag, I saw them again. The footprints. They led right up to the edge of my chosen campsite, and then they just stopped. There were no tracks leading away. It was as if the person who was walking backwards had walked to this very spot and then vanished into thin air. I should have left. I should have packed up and hiked through the night. But I was exhausted, and the thought of navigating the treacherous canyon in the dark was just as frightening. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. I set up my camp, my movements jerky and paranoid. I built a small fire, more for the comfort of the light than for warmth. I sat with my back against the rock wall, my trekking pole in my hand, and watched the shadows lengthen and deepen around me. Night in the desert is absolute. The darkness is total, and the silence is so profound it rings in your ears. I sat by my fire, straining to hear anything over the crackle of the flames. Hours passed. I was on edge, every nerve firing. I must have dozed off, slumped against my pack, because I was jolted awake by a sound. It was the soft scrape of a shoe on sandstone. I shot upright, my heart leaping into my throat. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a faint reddish light. I scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, but I couldn't see anything. I held my breath, listening. Silence. I told myself I had dreamed it, that I was letting the footprints get to me. I was about to lie back down when I heard it again. Scrape. It was closer this time, just at the edge of the light. And then I saw him. He was standing at the very limit of the fire's glow, perfectly still. He was a tall, thin man, dressed in a simple, dark suit, the kind of suit a banker or a funeral director might wear. It was completely wrong for the desert. His face was in shadow, but I could see that he was pale and gaunt. He just stood there watching me. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't breathe. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. My voice was a dry rasp. He didn't answer. He just stood there, a silent, motionless silhouette against the profound darkness of the canyon. I felt a primal fear, a terror that went beyond the rational. This was not a lost hiker. This was something else entirely. Then he began to move. He took one slow, deliberate step, backwards. His movements were fluid, graceful, and utterly unnatural. He took another step backwards, his dark eyes never leaving mine. He was moving away from my camp, but he was facing me the entire time. He didn't turn. He just walked backwards, into the darkness of the wash. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as his figure slowly receded, the sound of his shoes scraping on the rock the only sound in the dead silent canyon. He didn't look away, not even for a second, until the darkness finally consumed him. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the embers of my fire, shaking until the sun came up. As soon as there was enough light to see, I abandoned my campsite. I didn't even pack up my gear properly. I just stuffed everything into my pack and started walking. As I left the alcove, I looked at the ground. There were my boot prints from the day before. and there, leading away from my camp, was a single set of fresh tracks, the flat-soled shoes, pointing towards me but leading away. I practically ran the remaining 10 miles of the canyon. I didn't stop for water. I didn't stop to rest. I just had to get out of there. I never saw the footprints again. When I finally reached the dirt road where I'd parked my truck, I felt a wave of relief so intense my legs almost gave out. I don't know who or what I saw that night. A ghost? A madman? Some kind of desert spirit? I have no answers. But I know that the empty places of the world are not as empty as we think. There are things out there that move in ways we don't understand. And sometimes, if you're not careful, you'll cross paths with something that is walking in the opposite direction of everything you know to be real. And you'll see in its eyes that it has been waiting for you. The world is full of trails. Most lead to beautiful views and quiet moments. But some lead to places we were never meant to go, and to encounters we can never forget. The 4 stories you heard tonight are a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, the unknown is always just a few steps off the path. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been deep in the wilderness and felt that unshakable feeling of being watched? Have you ever seen something that defied all logical explanation? Share your own unsettling experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might just be the one that convinces someone else they aren't alone in what they saw. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, show your support by hitting the like button. And if you want to make sure you never miss another journey into the unknown, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. And finally, if you have your own true, terrifying story that you believe the world needs to hear, there is a link in the description where you can submit it directly to me. Your experience could be featured in a future video. Stay safe out there. And always, always trust your instincts.